The Daily Objective, a production of the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the objectivist philosophy of Ayn Rand to current events. And we're still going to be applying that philosophy to the current events that are taking place in the Middle East, Israel, and Gaza. But before we get to that, well, first, let me tell you that doing the show with me today is Yonatan. How do I pronounce your last name? I don't want to butcher it.
It's Yonatan Daon.
Okay. He said it himself. I don't have to. Wonderful. I thought Liebowitz was tough to pronounce. Before we get into that, we got some the current events to talk about. I'll read the news to you. We have 105 Israeli soldiers have died in the ground invasion of Gaza. At least 20 soldiers were killed by friendly fire or accidents during the ground operation in the Gaza Strip, representing 1/5 of all fatalities, according to data released by the IDF on Tuesday. The military said in a statement that efforts are constantly being made to prevent casualties from friendly fire and operational accidents by investigating these accidents and issuing lessons to thousands of soldiers in the Strip. And a tanker hit by a Houthi missile en route to Israel's Ashdod port. The risk to shipping routes posed by the Houthis represents a strategic threat to global maritime lanes in general and to Israel's maritime traffic in particular, with far-reaching political and economic impacts, read a statement from the port's administration. Yonatan, do you have anything you'd like to comment on with the news that I just read?
Well, I'm not a military expert. I would like to add that I hope that these deaths have not been for the sake of protecting our enemies' lives, which sometimes, unfortunately, they tend to be like that. But I know they're doing a fantastic job out there, and my heart's to their families of these soldiers.
Okay, so there is a former ambassador, United States ambassador to Israel, who is calling for Netanyahu to resign. He says that Netanyahu's continuation in office makes Israel less safe. And in particular, what was mentioned in the article was a recent New York Times article that discussed Netanyahu's allegedly, and I'll explain why I say allegedly during the course of the discussion, propping up Hamas, over the years and allowing funds to get to them. And the reasoning given that maybe he was trying to play Hamas off of the PLO in order to make it more difficult to have a Palestinian state. So my first question, I guess, Yonatan, is do you think that Netanyahu should should resign? And what do you think about the story that we read about this?
Yes, he should resign, but he should have done that October 8th or 7th. Not now. It's a bit trickier. But yes, in principle, he should take the moral responsibility and face the consequences of what happened here. I don't believe any tech CEO would remain in position after such a disaster happened to his company. And when the stakes are significantly higher, I don't see why a leader of a country needs to stay in power. It's true that the opposition is terrible, but that man has the moral responsibility. He has been in power for 14 years now. So yeah, he has to go. About the story of him prepping Hamas, he has prepped Hamas. He has I would say the policy was, as you said, he wanted a strong divided Palestinian movement, a divided Palestinian movement. So the stronger Hamas is, the more divided they are in the West Bank, the more it's a mess. And they have other groups as well, as we've discussed in a previous show. They have a lot of competing, I like to call them private security forces, to annoy my anarchist friends. So yes, he should go.
Okay, so I don't know enough about Netanyahu and I'm not an Israeli citizen to say whether he should go or not, but I will say this. It happened on his watch. It was a massive intelligence failure that allowed this to happen. And normally in those cases, the person at the head takes the hit. And especially, it's not like he came into office last week. I mean, he's been in office for what, 9 years or so? How long has he been the prime minister?
He has been the prime minister in 1996 until 1999, and now he has been the prime minister since 2020, actually. But he was the prime minister since 2009 until 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So he has been for the majority of this century, really, the prime minister of Israel. Yeah.
Okay. Now, as far as him propping up Hamas, I've come across this on social media in more places than I could count. So I looked to the origins, especially of the supposed comment that he made, where he said, if you're opposed to a Palestinian state, you should support Hamas. And I ultimately found the source of the article that reported that he said that. And I actually read an additional article by her about the initial article. And it said that, first of all, the quote was a paraphrase. It's being put out there as if it's an exact quote, but it's a paraphrase.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an exact quote. But anyway, so I reached out to the woman. Her name is Lahav Harkov. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. It's it's an Israeli name, and it was in an article in the Jerusalem Post. And I asked her if she was 100% certain that Netanyahu said this. And what she told me was, you can never be 100% certain if you're not in the room. But the spirit of it, yes, he said it. She believes so because she believes her sources. But I asked her, okay, go ahead.
No, finish, sorry.
Okay. I asked her if it's true that Netanyahu was propping up Hamas, and she said absolutely not. She said what it was aid coming from Qatar to Gazans, humanitarian aid. And the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear that is all these critics right now of Netanyahu or who are saying he shouldn't have let that aid get in and it got to Hamas, which undoubtedly it does, as it always does in those situations, gets to the, where it's not supposed to go. But if he said, no, we're not going to allow humanitarian aid to go from Qatar into Gaza, there would have been an uproar about that, probably from the same people who are criticizing him now. But as to the quote about supporting Hamas to prevent the Palestinian state, the way that she understood it was that he has critics from the right. His right-wing critics were criticizing him for allowing the aid to get into Gaza. And his response to them wasn't that this was his policy to prop up Hamas, but he said to them, if you are opposed to a Palestinian state, then you shouldn't oppose this. You should support it because it ultimately does weaken the chances. But not that that was his intention. And given that she was the source of the story, I'm more inclined to trust her version of events than I am the people who are misquoting Netanyahu all over social media. But again, I'm not an Israeli. I'm not there. So what is your take on what the woman told me?
Well, I think the most important thing is to look at the actual facts and the history, right? So
yeah.
Netanyahu, on his first term, he had an agreement with Yasser Arafat called the Y Agreement, 1998, where they agreed to open an international airport in Gaza. There was a period when there was an international airport in Gaza. They agreed to multiple appeasements and lands to transfer to the Palestinian Authority back then. After that, of course, in future terms, he had multiple negotiations, multiple agreements. He released, I think, most famously, the biggest concession and something that indeed helped Hamas significantly was the release of over 1,000 Hamas terrorists in exchange for one Israeli soldier, the famous Gilad Shalit agreement. And you have these suitcases full of Qatari dollars. Yes, these was Qatari dollars, but this was the policy. They let them in. The Mossad agents flew to Qatar to bring these suitcases. Imagine that, Mossad agents flying to Qatar to bring suitcases and driving them to Gaza to give them to the hands of these murderers who has the blood of Israelis on their hands. So I don't know about specific quotes. This is just the history. This is what we have. We have also numerous military operations, countless rockets being fired at Israeli soldiers. All of that while refusing to decisively destroy Hamas. This was all done under Netanyahu's leadership. So I don't know about quotes, but I'm telling you, and you can look at the history.
Yeah, no,
This is what's been going
Jonathan,
on.
I'm not
Yeah.
disputing the history. What I'm talking about is the intention. The intention of allowing the Qatari money into Gaza was not to support Hamas. It may have been a dumb policy. It probably was. And it may have gotten into Hamas's hands. But Netanyahu wasn't some evil genius behind the scenes trying to
Right,
support
right,
Hamas.
right.
And that's what's being claimed. And it's
Mhm.
also in part being claimed in a nefarious way, as if it was this evil intent. I don't think it was good. I agree, all that stuff happened. But Netanyahu, for whatever failures he had, is not trying to support Hamas.
Well, he's a pragmatist, right? He doesn't have any principled a view,
Okay.
and from his perspective, it could have been seen as a lesser of two evils, right? We're giving them this money, we're getting some peace. I'm not saying that it was a conspiracy of him against
Yeah.
Israel. That's absolutely, I agree with you. And regarding if Qatar intended this to be humanitarian money, allow me to question that. Qatar
Oh,
has a
them.
very
Yes. I'm talking about
yeah
Netanyahu. I'm talking
yeah
about
yeah
Israel's
yes
stake in this, because I don't right, like at the beginning of this war, when they weren't allowing aid in, everybody criticized Israel for not allowing humanitarian aid to the people they're at war with. I mean, well, not to the civilians. I'm not saying they're at war with them, but to the territory in which the people they're at war with are residing. I can't imagine if Qatar is willing to give money and they're saying it's for humanitarian aid, and Israel says, no, we're not allowing that aid in. The whole world would have been in an uproar about that. They would
Mhm.
have said they're allowing these people to starve. They're allowing them to go without food and water, without proper shelter. All that sort of stuff would have been what they were saying. I'm not defending Netanyahu so much as I am pointing out the inaccuracies and hypocrisy of some of his enemies.
That's true. That's true. There's a lot of inaccuracies, a lot of hypocrisies. um I agree with you on that, but it still doesn't change the fact that it was wrong, right? And I
Oh,
think
no
that's the most
doubt.
important thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't say I'm 100% because I don't know much about what the effects of the policy, but on the face of it, it looks like a dumb policy to me because of
Mhm.
what you said. Because you could intend the money to go to humanitarian aid all you want. Ultimately, it's going to end up in the hands of Hamas. Even if it's a case where Hamas now doesn't have to spend its own money on infrastructure and things of that nature, so they can spend it spend it militarily, it's still going to redound to their benefit. I just don't know enough to where I'm willing to say 100% I know it was a horrible idea. Obviously you're more well positioned to do so. So
Yes, yes, and
what would be the
yeah.
result, Yonatan, if Netanyahu, say he resigns tomorrow? It's not going to
Mhm.
happen. I got it, but say he does. What happens next? Like in America, for instance, if the president resigns, the vice president takes over. If Netanyahu resigns, what's the next step, and what's likely to come of it?
Well, one of his Likud party members will take over. I'm sure they'll decide exactly who that might be, and hopefully it'll be a less divisive figure, because Netanyahu is very hated is like dividing the country 50-50. You either hate him fearlessly, or you admire him. You call him the King Bibi. So hopefully someone who's more widely accepted amongst the Israeli public, especially in these dire times. So that's what's likely to happen. But if he resigns, which he'll obviously never do. So yeah.
We have a a super chat coming from Bonnie Bertrand for 99 cents. Thank you very much, Bonnie. Yonatan, I got to ask this. What is BB? I've been hearing this nickname for over 20 years. What does it mean? Where does
Yeah.
it come from?
Well, his name is Benjamin, and BB is BB Benjamin.
Oh, that's like a nickname for anybody named
Yeah.
Benjamin. Oh,
Well,
so
I think it's a unique thing for him. I never heard anyone else. Maybe it was before he was prime minister. It was more common for Benjamins, but I don't know more than that.
okay. So do you think if there was someone else at the helm, somebody else from the Likud party, there would be a better chance of eradicating Hamas
So
than
so
there is
that's
with
that's
BB at the
an
helm?
that's an important issue. Most people in Israeli politics are the same. You have even with the opposition party, you have Gantz, you have Lapid. They're all the same. Especially Gantz, who was the chief of military staff. He was also propagating the same, appeasement policy. So I wouldn't even want to see him. I don't say that they are any better, frankly, than Netanyahu. But if there's a single person that I would say is better, it'll be Naftali Bennett, the person who was prime minister not that long ago. As you've seen, probably if you followed him on social media, presents a much more principled approach, and he's 100% committed to eradicating Hamas. I don't trust anyone inside the Likud. The Likud tend to be a party that is similar to the Trumpism phenomena, where they're all just worshipping Netanyahu. You don't see any opposition to anything he says, really, from inside the party. So I think that's the only person I would like to see, but unlikely. But actually, he's been gaining popularity. He was very hated when he was prime minister, and now I think he's much more popular. So who knows, maybe in the next election.
I got to tell you, from my vantage point as an American, it seems less and less likely, almost by the day, that Israel's actually going to do what's necessary to root out Hamas, regardless of who's in there. Am I way off on this, or is that the sense in Israel as well, that the chances of Israel doing this right, it's just not going to happen?
Well, yes, I'd agree with you, but I would hope that we will get as close as possible there, and hopefully something could actually help it make it less bad. The US, I think, is very bad in this sense. Is probably the worst influence on moving Israel away from eradicating Hamas, despite its support. And yes, I do agree with you. I think it will probably end. We'll be very close. We'll be very close, and then we'll say, okay, that's enough. Let's go back. Let's have a ceasefire. Let's end the bloodshed, and then the clock will only start ticking until the next attack. So it'll be terrible. But I would like to add that in Israel, the voices from inside Israel, I do hear a lot of voices. You can see them in the media of ex high-ranking generals even saying that Israel has to be more aggressive. Israel has to be decisive. We have to ignore the Americans. We have to do what's necessary. So maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong.
I'm glad you mentioned ceasefire, because we have a question from a member in the chat. Is Netanyahu adamant about no ceasefire? And are there any opposition leaders that might accept the ceasefire?
Nobody will accept the ceasefire in Israel, not for the exchange, at least for all of the hostages, at least that, a temporary ceasefire. Nobody will accept a permanent ceasefire. I didn't hear any voices like that from the mainstream politicians. What was the other part of the question?
Well, it's you answered both of them by saying nobody will accept it. The first part was, will Netanyahu, is there any chance he'd accept the ceasefire? And the second one, any opposition leaders that might accept it. You said nobody will, so
I don't think so. But Netanyahu, when he said, whenever you hear him say something, you always have to take it with a pinch of salt because of his track record of not standing up to his word. But I think if you look at the Israeli public, you look at the streets, you can look at the protests, you can see if inside Israel of hostage families, for example, I really doubt that there will be something like that.
I got a question for you as an Israeli, Yonatan.
Yeah.
If you could snap your fingers and get the ideal solution, what would it be? Would it be one state of Israel in which Palestinians could live as citizens? Would it be a two-state solution? How would you have it, and why? Like, what would be the best, and why do you think so?
It's $1 million question, isn't it? So what will have to be done when it comes to Gaza and the West Bank? It's important to also mention the West Bank has the same danger as it has in Gaza. True, they don't have missiles, but they have lots of guns. They have lots of weapons, and they're ready to take arms. A lot of them are against Jews, as they have always been. So what needs to be done is Israel has to occupy Gaza. It has to demilitarize it completely. It has to pacify the population. And then what needs to be done is to give them the incentives to leave to Europe, if they want to leave to Europe, to Africa. There are many countries in Europe that will accept them, such as Scotland, for example, and he control the area until it's peaceful, until it doesn't hold any risk to Israelis. Israel does not need Gaza. We don't need another settlement in Gaza, and I don't think nobody in Israel really wants that, except from the very fringe extremists. So what we need is to have a military control there. If they want to immigrate to Israel, if they want, I'm for free immigration. So if they want to accept Israeli democracy and Western values and all that, I'll be happy to have them as law-abiding citizens. I have no problem with that. But after what we've seen on October 7th, there has to be a profound effort to uproot all the terrorist inclinations of the population, all the terrorist supporting inclinations they have, because a lot of them do support October 7th, and hopefully the next generation will be Western values admiring, peace-loving people, such as the Israelis are.
What are your thoughts? I'm glad I have someone here from Israel. What are your thoughts on the settlements? Because I've studied a lot of Israeli history, but when it comes to the settlements, I just don't know. I mean, is it immoral that the Israelis are settling in the West Bank? Are these something that the government shouldn't allow, should protect? Like, what is going on there?
Well, it's a bit of a Wild West, and the fact that you're confused about it reflects that. It's a bit of a mess what's going on there. I was actually in the West Bank last week. It was quite an experience. So it really depends from case by case, right? There are full cities that are have been established for decades on land that was acquired through various means. Some of the land was unlawfully taken. And in most of these cases, there have been court cases in Israel. And some of the land has been returned, some financial compensation has been given. Some of the instances, the land was empty and they just settled there. And, they build civilization there. They build cities, they build their factories, they build industry. They made it their own property. So it really depends from a case-by-case scenario. But most of them are, I think, moral. There are people with Western values, most of these settlers, some of them are really fringe and very, I would say, ultra religious and with nationalistic elements too, which is, I think, the worst kind that you can find here. And they also, some of them are engaged in heinous crimes towards their Palestinian neighbors. But the difference between Israel and Palestine is these people are prosecuted by Israel. Israel is a rule of law. You can't just throw rocks at Palestinians in Israel without having consequences. It's not the same in Palestine. If you throw stones, or even more, if you go across the border and stab an Israeli soldier, you're not only being treated as a hero, but you have streets named after you. You get pension and all that. So that reflects the basic difference. But yeah, most of these I would say are lawful, but it also reflects the lack of willingness to make decisive action by the Israeli government. This should never have been this way. We shouldn't have done Oslo. We shouldn't have created the Palestinian Authority to begin with. So it's all, it's like mistake upon mistake and another generation of mistake. Where exactly is the root of it? It's really hard to tell sometimes.
Thank you. We have a super chat from Wos Art for $5. Thank you very much. Wos Art. This morning on social media, I made a post because I keep reading a lot of really anti-Semitic stuff. Now, I'm an atheist, but my last name is Liebowitz, a Jewish last name. So what I put was, my last name is Liebowitz, although I'm an atheist. I'm not a big fan of Israel, although I do find them to be morally superior to their enemies. But for everybody that hates Jews, I just wanted to state clearly that I identify as a Jew. Now, what I found interesting was that I was criticized. One guy criticized me. He says, "Why aren't you a big fan of Israel?" And I said, well, ultimately, it's a semi-socialist state. They have conscription. There's a highly religious element there. And someone said, well, so is America. Are you not a big fan? I said, well, I'm really not a fan of any government, a big fan. But it was really it took me aback that I was criticized that way. Do you find that offensive that somebody would say that they're not a big fan of Israel?
I say that all the time. I say that to my Israeli friends. We all say that. We all say that
Yeah.
we hate so many things about this country. I go on and on about social security and the amount of income tax that I have to.
What the?
Are you all right? What happened? Dear viewers, do apologize. Are you right, Michael? You're muted. Can't hear you.
Michael, I think your audio disconnected. Are you okay?
Yeah, it's good. Are you right, Michael? Can't hear you. No.
Okay, well, I think we can wrap it up then. Let me just do
Okay.
do you have
Okay,
any?
I'm here. Can you hear
Oh,
me now?
Okay. Yeah. What happened, Michael?
The landlady of the house she came in through the window because the front door is locked. So she pushed in the air conditioner. I'm sitting here. All of a sudden the air conditioner came flying at me. So I'm
Jesus.
a little aggravated by the whole thing. But we do have upcoming shows. Our upcoming shows at 6 p.m. UK time, the reality show. There is a link in the chat. At 7 p.m. UK time, the Fountainhead Book Club for ARC UK members. So that's what we have coming on. I'm sorry for the chaos that ensued. I
We are in
apologize.
times of chaos.
Yes,
That's understandable.
thank you for a great show.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you,
All right.
viewers.